John had been waiting for this moment for months. After a long and tiring year in the busy city, he was finally going to spend a week in his mountain cabin. The cabin was a small, cozy place tucked away in a quiet neighborhood surrounded by tall pine trees and fresh air. It was his special place, a retreat where he could relax, think, and be alone with his thoughts. John loved this cabin because it was peaceful. The sounds of cars, people, and city noise were far away. Here, he could hear birds singing, wind rustling through the leaves, and sometimes the soft sound of a distant river. It was the kind of place that helped him forget his worries and feel calm inside. The neighborhood where the cabin stood was managed by a homeowners association, or HOA. The HOA made rules to keep the area clean and safe. Most people in the neighborhood liked these rules because they kept the place nice. But some rules were strict, and sometimes, they caused problems. John did not know many people in the neighborhood, but he knew his next-door neighbor, Karen. Karen was very involved in the HOA. She always wanted everything to be perfect and often told others what they should or should not do. She was serious about following rules and making sure everyone did the same. John had never had a real problem with Karen, but he did not enjoy her constant watching and judging. She could be loud and bossy, and John sometimes felt she cared too much about things that were not her business. Still, John tried to be polite and not cause trouble. That week, John had planned to spend his time reading, hiking, and enjoying the fresh mountain air. He looked forward to waking up early to see the sunrise and sitting on the porch with a cup of coffee. It was his way to rest and feel happy. But a few days before his trip, John's work asked him to come back early. He had to return to the city after only a few days at the cabin. It was disappointing, but John understood. Sometimes, life had unexpected changes, and he had to be ready. John packed quickly and left the cabin earlier than planned. He told no one about his change of plans. He wanted to come back and check on his cabin before leaving for the city. It felt strange to leave the cabin behind while things were still unfinished. When John arrived back at the cabin, it was late afternoon. The sun was low, casting long shadows across the trees. As he drove up the gravel driveway, he noticed something unusual. There were lights on inside the cabin. That was strange because he had not turned on any lights, and no one else had the keys. His heart beat faster. John felt a sudden worry. He stopped the car and looked carefully at the windows. Through the glass, he saw movement. There were people inside, several strangers who looked comfortable, as if they had been there for a while. John's mind raced. He did not know these people. Why were they in his cabin? How did they get in? His stomach tightened with a mix of fear and anger. He took his keys from his pocket and slowly unlocked the door. The door opened with a quiet creak, and the sounds from inside grew louder. He stepped inside, feeling strange and uneasy. The cabin, which was usually quiet and calm, was filled with noise. The strangers were laughing, talking loudly, and moving around as if the cabin was their home. There were snacks and drinks on the table, and blankets thrown over the couch. It was clear they had been there for some time. John's voice shook as he said, "Excuse me. Who are you? What are you doing in my cabin?" The strangers looked up, surprised to see him. Some smiled awkwardly, while others looked away. One of them, a young man, said, "We're just hanging out. No harm meant." John felt anger rising, but he tried to stay calm. "This is my property," he said firmly. "You don't have permission to be here." Before anyone could answer, John's phone rang. The screen showed it was Karen. He hesitated but answered the call. John. Karen's voice was sharp and loud. I'm calling the police right now. You are trespassing. You're supposed to be away. Why are you here causing trouble? John was shocked. Karen, wait. These people are in my cabin without permission. I just got here and found them inside. Karen's voice grew louder. I've been watching the place. I saw you weren't here, so I let some friends stay to keep the place safe. Now you're back, causing a scene. This isn't right. John could hardly believe what he was hearing. Karen, who always talked about rules, had given strangers access to his cabin without telling him. And now, she was accusing him. John felt a deep sadness. The person he thought was a neighbor, someone he shared a community with, was the one who had broken his trust. He took a deep breath. Karen, this is my home. You cannot let people in without asking me. There was silence on the other end before Karen said, you should leave before the police get here. John ended the call and looked around at the strangers. Some looked uncomfortable now, others curious. He knew this was just the beginning of a bigger problem. The peace he loved about this place was gone, and he was not sure if it would ever return. But John also knew one thing: he had to protect what was his. No matter how difficult it became. John stood quietly inside his cabin, feeling a heavy weight in his chest. The strangers looked at him with different expressions. Some were nervous, some unsure, and others just plain confused. None of them spoke, but the noise they had been making before stopped suddenly. The air felt thick and strange. John's mind was spinning. How could this happen? How had people been inside his cabin without his permission? And why had Karen, his neighbor, and the HOA board member, let it happen? He took a slow breath and tried to calm himself. This was his home, his safe place, and he deserved to know what was going on. One of the strangers, a woman with soft brown hair, finally spoke up. We didn't mean to cause any trouble, she said quietly. Karen told us it was okay to stay here while you were away. John looked at her carefully. Karen? She told you it was okay? Did she say why? The woman nodded. She said she wanted to keep the cabin safe. That no one would hurt it if we were here. John frowned. Did she ask me? Did she even tell you to leave when I came back? No, the woman said, shaking her head. She said to stay until you left again. John felt a wave of shock. He could not believe what he was hearing. Karen, who always talked about rules and order, had let strangers live in his cabin without his permission. And worse, she was telling them to stay even after he came back. John's heart beat faster. This was not just about breaking rules. It was about trust, respect, and honesty. Karen had crossed a line. John looked around the room. The strangers seemed mostly harmless young people, relaxed, with no bad intentions. But it was still his cabin. His space. And they did not have the right to be there. Okay, John said, trying to keep his voice steady. I need you all to leave. Now. This is my property, and you don't have permission to stay here. The young man who had spoken earlier frowned. We don't want to cause problems, but Karen said we could stay. She said you might come back later, and then we could leave. John shook his head. I'm here now. So, please gather your things and go. Some of the strangers began to pack quietly. Others looked uncomfortable but did not argue. John felt a small relief: at least they were leaving without causing more trouble. As the group slowly moved toward the door, John's phone buzzed again. This time, it was a message from another neighbor, Tom. "Hey John, I heard some noise at your cabin. Is everything okay?" John typed back quickly. "Not really. Some people were inside without my permission. Karen let them in. I'm sorting it out now." He put the phone down and watched the last of the strangers leave. When the door finally closed behind them, the cabin felt empty, too empty. John walked around, checking the rooms. Nothing seemed damaged, but the feeling of violation stayed with him. Suddenly, his phone rang again. It was Karen. John answered, trying to keep his calm. "John," Karen said, her voice sharp. "You need to calm down. I was only trying to help. I didn't mean to cause trouble." John took a deep breath. "Karen, you can't let people stay in someone else's cabin without permission. That's not how it works." "I was just trying to protect the place," she said quickly. "You weren't here, and I thought it was better than leaving it empty." John shook his head, even though Karen couldn't see him. "That's not your decision to make. You should have called me. I trusted you as a neighbor, but now I'm not sure." Karen paused. "I'm sorry if you feel that way, but I'm doing what's best for the neighborhood." John felt anger rising again. "That's not how trust works, Karen. You broke my trust." The call ended abruptly. John stared at his phone, feeling tired and frustrated. He decided to take a walk outside, hoping the fresh air would clear his mind. The sky was turning orange with the sunset, and the trees whispered softly in the evening breeze. The mountains looked peaceful and distant, but John's heart was heavy. As he walked toward the edge of his property, he saw a few neighbors outside their homes, looking his way. Some smiled politely, others whispered to each other. John felt their eyes, wondering what they thought about the strange situation. One neighbor, an older man named Frank, came over. "John, I'm sorry to hear about what happened. Karen's been acting strange lately. I've heard from others that she's been using the HOA rules in ways that aren't fair." John nodded. "I never expected her to do this. I thought she cared about the neighborhood, but now I'm not sure." Frank put a hand on John's shoulder. "You're not alone. If you want, I can help you talk to the HOA board." It's time someone stood up for what's right. John felt a small spark of hope. Maybe he wasn't alone after all. Maybe this was a chance to make things better, not just for him, but for the whole community. He looked back at the cabin. The place he loved. The place that had been broken into, but not destroyed. John knew that the road ahead would be difficult. There would be challenges, arguments, and hard conversations. But he was ready. For now, though, he let the cool evening air fill his lungs and the quiet of the mountains remind him why he had come here in the first place. He would fight for his home. He would fight for respect. And he would find peace again. The next morning, John woke up feeling restless. The sun streamed through the windows of his cabin, but the peaceful silence he loved was missing. His mind kept returning to the events of the night before. Karen's actions had not only violated his trust but also disturbed the calm he thought the cabin offered. John sat at the small kitchen table, sipping his coffee slowly, trying to plan what to do next. He knew he could not ignore what had happened. If he stayed silent, Karen might do it again. But if he spoke up, he worried it would make things worse. Just as he was about to leave the cabin to meet Frank, his phone buzzed again. This time, it was a call from the HOA president, Mr. Wilson. John answered, hoping for a calm conversation. John, Mr. Wilson said, I heard about the trouble last night. Karen called me. She says you caused a scene and broke some rules. John felt his chest tighten. Mr. Wilson, I came back early to check on my cabin. I found strangers inside, people Karen let in without my permission. I didn't cause any scene. I just asked them to leave. Mr. Wilson sighed deeply. Karen is a strong member of the HOA board. She takes the rules seriously. But this situation sounds complicated. John kept his voice steady. It is complicated because Karen didn't follow the rules herself. She let people into someone else's home. That's a serious violation. There was a pause on the other end. All right, Mr. Wilson finally said. I will call a board meeting to discuss this. For now, try to keep things calm. John hung up, feeling a mix of relief and worry. A board meeting meant others would hear his side, but it also meant Karen might try to defend herself and make him look like the troublemaker. Determined to prepare, John reached out to Frank. They agreed to meet that afternoon at Frank's house, a few houses down from John's cabin. When John arrived, Frank greeted him warmly. Glad you came. I talked to a few neighbors. They're upset about Karen's actions too, but no one wanted to say anything until now. John nodded. It feels like I'm the only one who noticed. Karen acts like she owns this place. Frank laughed quietly. You're not the only one who thinks that. Some people have been afraid to speak up because Karen can be difficult. They sat down and made a plan. John would tell his story clearly at the board meeting, with facts and calm words. Frank promised to support him and encourage other neighbors to come forward. Meanwhile, John also wanted to make sure his cabin was safe. He decided to change the locks and install a security camera. If Karen or anyone else tried to enter without permission again, he would have proof. Back at his cabin, John called a locksmith. While waiting for him to arrive, John cleaned the place, putting things back in order. The strange feeling of being invaded stayed with him, but he refused to let it take over. Later, John received a message from one of the strangers who had stayed in his cabin. It was a short apology. Sorry for the trouble. We didn't mean any harm. We thought Karen had permission. John didn't reply. He wasn't angry at them. The real problem was Karen. The day of the HOA board meeting arrived faster than John expected. He put on his best shirt, packed a small notebook with notes, and drove to the community center where the meeting was held. The room was filled with neighbors, some familiar faces, others strangers. Karen was there too, sitting with a confident smile. John felt his stomach tighten but reminded himself to stay calm. The HOA president, Mr. Wilson, called the meeting to order. Tonight, we discuss an important issue brought to the board's attention, he began. John has requested we review events involving the use of his cabin. John stood up and spoke clearly. Thank you, Mr. Wilson. I returned early to my cabin and found several people inside, people who were not my guests. I asked them to leave, but I later learned that Karen allowed them to stay without my permission. There were murmurs in the room. Karen stood up, her voice firm. I did allow friends to stay at John's cabin, she said. I believed it was for the safety of the property while he was away. I didn't intend any harm. John looked at her directly. Karen, you don't have the right to decide who stays in someone else's home. That's not protecting the community. That's breaking trust. Other neighbors began to speak up. Some supported John, others defended Karen. The room grew tense. Mr. Wilson raised his hand for silence. We must remember this is about following the rules and respect for neighbors. Karen, did you contact John before letting people into his cabin? Karen hesitated. No, I did not. Mr. Wilson nodded. That is a serious problem. The board will review this matter further. Meanwhile, John, we appreciate your calm and clear explanation. The meeting ended with promises to investigate, and many neighbors came up to John afterward to offer support. Some even shared their own stories about Karen's behavior. John felt a strange mix of relief and exhaustion. He had stood up for himself and found allies. But he also saw that Karen's actions had hurt more than just him. On his way home, John looked out the car window at the mountains. The sky was clear and bright, but inside, he felt a storm brewing. Not just outside in the weather, but in the neighborhood he once thought was peaceful. He knew things would not be easy from here on. But for the first time, John felt ready to face the challenge. The battle for respect and peace had only just begun. The evening after the HOA meeting, John was still feeling the weight of everything that had happened. He sat quietly in his cabin, staring out the window at the tall trees swaying gently in the breeze. His mind was full of thoughts: the strangers in his home, Karen's betrayal, the board meeting, and the uncertain future. Suddenly, his phone rang again. This time, it was an unknown number. He hesitated but answered. Hello. Sir, this is Officer Davis with the County Sheriff's Department. We received a call from a neighbor reporting a disturbance at your cabin. Can you tell me what's going on? John's heart raced. He had hoped the police wouldn't get involved again so soon. Officer Davis, I'm John. I returned early to my cabin and found some people inside who were not invited. They left when I asked. The neighbor, Karen, called to report me, saying I was trespassing or causing trouble, but I'm the owner. There was silence on the other end. Thank you for the information, John. We'll send an officer to your cabin to check everything. Please stay inside and wait. John agreed and hung up. Within minutes, he heard the sound of police cars arriving on the gravel road. His heart pounded as he opened the door and waited. Two officers, a man and a woman, stepped inside politely. Good evening, sir. We're here to understand the situation, said Officer Davis, the man from the phone. John explained calmly what had happened: how he returned early, found strangers in his cabin, and asked them to leave, and how Karen had given them permission without telling him. The officers listened carefully and then asked John for proof of ownership and identification, which he provided without hesitation. After checking the cabin for any damage and talking with John, the officers said they would speak with Karen to hear her side of the story. John was relieved to see them take the situation seriously. He hoped the truth would come out soon. As the officers left to speak with Karen, John sat back down and tried to relax. But the quiet was soon broken by the sound of a car stopping outside. Karen had arrived. John didn't expect to see her again so soon. Karen walked up to the cabin door, her face serious but trying to hide nervousness. John, she said, I just want to talk. Please. John hesitated but nodded. She stepped inside, and the air between them felt tense. I didn't mean to cause you so much trouble, Karen began. I thought I was helping. I wanted to keep the cabin safe. John looked at her, trying to understand. Karen, I know you thought you were helping, but you didn't have the right to do that. This is my home. Karen sighed deeply. I'm sorry. I should have called you first. I was worried about vandals and wanted to protect the neighborhood. John softened a little but stayed firm. I appreciate that, but there are better ways to protect things. You can't decide for me. Karen looked down, her voice quieter. I guess I was trying to control things too much. Before John could respond, the officers returned. Karen, Officer Davis said, we've spoken with neighbors and reviewed the situation. The board will need to address this, but legally, you had no right to let anyone into John's cabin without permission. That is trespassing. Karen's face fell, and John saw regret there. The officers thanked them both and left. The room felt heavier after they left. John and Karen stood quietly for a moment. Finally, Karen said, I want to make this right. Tell me what I can do. John thought for a moment. The first step is to respect boundaries. No more decisions like this without asking. And maybe, the HOA needs to make clearer rules. Karen nodded slowly. I'll bring it up at the next meeting. John felt a small hope grow. Maybe things could improve. Later that night, John sat alone on the porch, looking at the stars. The mountains were still peaceful, but the people around them were not always easy to understand. John realized that peace wasn't just about quiet forests or empty cabins. It was about respect for homes, for people, and for rules. And respect, he knew, sometimes took courage to demand. The next morning, John woke up early as usual. The sun was just starting to rise behind the mountains, painting the sky with shades of pink and orange. The air smelled fresh and cool, and the birds were singing their morning songs. Despite the recent troubles, John felt a little peace inside him. He brewed a cup of coffee and sat on the porch, looking out over the trees. His mind wandered back to last night's conversation with Karen and the visit from the police officers. Things were changing. Maybe this was the start of something better, not just for him, but for the whole neighborhood. John's phone buzzed. It was a message from Karen. Thank you for your patience. I'm working on a proposal for the HOA about cabin safety and clear rules for guests. I hope we can fix this together. John smiled. This was more than he expected. Just then, Frank appeared, carrying 2 cups of coffee. Morning, John, Frank said cheerfully. Looks like you're making progress. Heard about Karen's message? John nodded. Yeah, it feels good to have someone willing to work on the problem. Maybe this place can be peaceful again. Frank sat down beside him. It's a start. But you know, sometimes change takes time. People don't like to give up control easily. John took a sip of his coffee. I understand that. But respect is more important than control. Frank smiled. Wise words. The 2 men talked about plans for the HOA meeting and how to encourage neighbors to support clearer, fairer rules. John knew it would not be easy. Karen was still part of the board, and she had many friends there. But John felt ready. For the first time, he believed that standing up for what was right could make a difference. Later that day, John returned to his cabin to check the new security camera the locksmith had installed. The small device looked simple but powerful. It could record anyone who entered or left, protecting John's property and giving him peace of mind. As he adjusted the camera, he noticed a note left on his porch. It was from a neighbor named Linda. John, I heard about what happened. I'm sorry you had to go through that. If you ever need help or company, just call. You're not alone. John felt warmth spread in his chest. For so long, he had felt isolated, but now he realized there were people around who cared. That evening, John decided to take a walk through the neighborhood. He wanted to meet more neighbors and rebuild connections. As he walked, he saw people tending their gardens, walking dogs, and chatting on porches. The neighborhood was alive, full of stories and lives like his own. He stopped at a house where an elderly woman was planting flowers. "Hi," John said softly. "I'm John, I live at the cabin nearby." The woman smiled warmly. "I'm Mary." "Nice to meet you, John. I heard about your troubles. It's hard when neighbors don't understand each other." John nodded. "Yes, but I'm hoping things will get better. We all want to live in peace." Mary handed him a small flower pot. "Here, plant this near your porch. It will remind you that even small things can grow into something beautiful." John accepted the pot gratefully. "Thank you, Mary. That means a lot." Walking back to his cabin, John felt lighter. The mountain air, the kindness of neighbors, and the promise of change gave him hope. That night, as he sat by the fireplace, John thought about what he had learned. He realized that peace was not just about quiet places but about people. It was about respect, honesty, and listening to one another. John knew the road ahead might still be rocky, but he was ready to walk it. He was ready to protect his home, stand for what was right, and build a better community. And most importantly, he was ready to forgive and move forward. The cabin, his sanctuary, was no longer just a place to escape. It was a place to grow, to connect, and to find strength. John smiled and closed his eyes, feeling the warmth of the fire and the hope of a new beginning. The day of the next HOA meeting arrived quickly. John woke up feeling a mixture of nervousness and determination. After the last meeting's chaos, he knew this one would be important not just for himself, but for the entire neighborhood. He dressed carefully in a clean shirt and jeans, grabbed his notebook with notes, and headed to the community center. As he drove through the quiet streets, he noticed neighbors outside, chatting and going about their day. Some glanced his way, others smiled politely. John felt the weight of their eyes but pushed the doubt away. He was here to make things right. When he entered the community center, the room buzzed with quiet conversations. Many neighbors had come, some familiar, others not. Karen was there, sitting confidently at the board's table, but her smile seemed less certain than before. John found a seat near Frank and a few others who had offered support. He glanced around and noticed Linda and Mary from the neighborhood. Their presence gave him courage. Soon, Mr. Wilson, the HOA president, called the meeting to order. "Thank you all for coming," he said. "Tonight, we discuss important changes to our neighborhood rules and address recent concerns about property use and safety." John's heart beat faster. This was his chance. When Mr. Wilson opened the floor, John stood up. "Hello everyone. I'm John, and I live in the cabin near the woods. Recently, I returned early from a trip and found strangers in my home, people who were let in without my permission. This caused a lot of problems, and I believe it's time we create clear, fair rules to prevent this from happening again." He spoke slowly, making sure everyone heard. It's about respect for each other's homes and boundaries. If we don't have clear rules, this kind of thing can happen again, and no one will feel safe. There were nods around the room. John saw some neighbors whispering, some looking thoughtful. Karen stood up next. "I admit I made mistakes. I thought I was protecting the neighborhood by allowing people to stay in John's cabin while he was away. I realize now that I should have asked first and followed the rules." John watched her carefully, surprised by her honesty. "I propose," Karen continued, "that we work together to improve our community's communication and safety. We need rules that everyone understands and agrees to." Mr. Wilson nodded. "Thank you, Karen. It's important to admit when we're wrong and work toward solutions." Then, several neighbors raised their hands to speak. Some shared stories of similar problems they had faced. Others suggested ideas for new rules, such as requiring owners' permission before anyone stays in a property and better communication about neighborhood safety. Linda spoke warmly. "We need to support each other and be open. It's not just about rules, but about building trust." Mary added, "Sometimes, kindness and respect matter more than strict rules." John felt a warmth in the room. This was more than a meeting, it was a beginning. As the discussion continued, the board agreed to create new policies based on respect, clear communication, and safety. They planned to send information to all residents and hold regular meetings to listen to concerns. When the meeting ended, many neighbors came to talk to John. "Thank you for speaking up," Frank said with a smile. "You started something important." Karen approached him as well. "John, I want to truly apologize again. I hope we can move forward as neighbors." John nodded. "I want that too, Karen. Let's work together." Outside, the sun was setting, casting a warm glow over the neighborhood. John felt a new sense of belonging, as if the community was finally healing. As he walked back to his cabin, John looked up at the sky. The stars were beginning to shine, quiet and steady. He thought about how trust and respect, once broken, could be rebuilt with patience and courage. His cabin was safe again, not just because of locks and cameras, but because of the people around him. John knew challenges might still come, but he was ready. For the first time in a long while, he felt hopeful. The mountains around him stood tall and strong, and so would he. Weeks passed since the big HOA meeting. Slowly but surely, the changes John and his neighbors worked on started to take shape. Clear rules were sent out to everyone. No one was allowed to let guests stay in someone else's home without permission. Communication between neighbors improved. The community was beginning to heal. John noticed these changes every day. People greeted him with smiles on their walks. Conversations felt friendlier. Even Karen seemed different, less controlling, more respectful. It wasn't perfect, but it was better. One bright morning, John stood outside his cabin, breathing in the crisp mountain air. The security camera he had installed was working well, but now, he didn't feel the need to watch it all the time. Trust was slowly returning. John's phone rang. It was Frank. "Hey, John. Want to go fishing at the lake today?" "It's a beautiful day," Frank said cheerfully. John smiled. "Sounds perfect. I could use a break from all this." They met by the lake, where the water sparkled under the sun. They talked about life, the neighborhood, and the future. For the first time in a long while, John felt relaxed. The stress from the past troubles was lifting. As they fished, John thought about how much had changed in just a few weeks. It wasn't just about rules or meetings. It was about people learning to listen, to respect one another, and to work together. Back in the neighborhood, John saw Karen talking with Linda and Mary, laughing and sharing stories. He realized that even difficult people could change when given a chance. That evening, as the sun set behind the mountains, John sat on his porch with a cup of tea. The forest was quiet, the stars bright above. He felt at peace. Suddenly, he heard footsteps approaching. It was Karen. "Hi, John," she said softly. "I wanted to thank you for standing up, for being patient, and for helping us all grow." John smiled. "Thank you, Karen. It wasn't easy, but it was worth it. We're neighbors now, and I hope we stay that way." She nodded. "Me too." They sat together for a moment, watching the night sky. John thought about how sometimes, the hardest battles lead to the greatest peace. His cabin was not just a place to escape anymore. It was a home, surrounded by people who cared. And for John, that was the greatest feeling of all.